Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world.
This week's edition of Impactful Teamwork is about a topic that I was recently talking about on one of my 20-minute teachings, which is called Reward the Try. And I really want to talk a little bit about psychological safety and how we can reframe what we're doing in the workplace and create a bunch of experiments. And the reason I wanted to address this topic today is because it's something I'm seeing coming up a lot with clients that I'm talking to at the moment. We clearly are living in times that are very frenetic. We've never seen them before. Speed of change is immense. And what's going on is that companies are navigating uncertainty and positions they've never been before. So we don't actually know what is going on. And so we've got to find a different way of dealing with it. And I really like to suggest that we want to address the activities that we're doing in our business right now as a bunch of experiments. Because one of the things I do know to be true is that generally, when I'm talking to clients, they don't really have a performance problem. They have what I call a psychological safety debt. And what do I mean by that? It means that sometime along the way, our team members realize that when they try and do something new and innovative in business, it doesn't always work out. And more than likely, they get in trouble for it and they pay for it, maybe with their job. And that's not a place where anyone wants to go. And particularly given the economic times we're living in right now, why would anyone want to experiment and try something new when they fear that they might lose their job over it? And one of the challenges is that unless we create this psychological safety within the workplace, what happens is our team members don't talk up and they don't give us new ideas. They stop taking the initiative because they want to ensure there's some certainty out there. And this is very detrimental to a business. We need our team members to speak up, come up with new ideas, because let's face it, the people on the front line have the best ideas, the best answers to the problems that we're trying to currently solve. But when we don't engage with our team members or they shut down and stop speaking out and stop proffering ideas about how to make the business better and do things, then actually what happens is the business starts losing momentum and the business ultimately will grind to a halt if we don't get all of these ideas getting fed through. So this is the topic that we're going to unpack a little bit today. And we're going to really look at how we can improve trust, take away the fear that sometimes exists within the business culture, and how can we create, more importantly, these small experiments and turn them into momentum in order to move the business forward. So I'd just like to think a little bit about this question for the moment. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that your team members can take risks and experiment without fear of repercussions? So where 1 is that they're paralyzed with fear and 10 is that they are freely experimenting. Where are you on that scale between 1 and 10 on how confident are your team members that they can take risks and experiment without the fear of repercussions? Because if you're somebody that's a 10, you're probably thinking that you've got a culture where people are really learning fast and we're experimenting a lot. And that's great. If you're scored more like a 1 and you're more down in what I call the red zone, then this is the pace where people get paralyzed by fear. And we're not going to get the innovation and creativity coming through from our team members. So wherever you are on that scale between 1 and 10 is probably a prediction of the decision-making velocity within your business, the level of innovation, and also the level of retention of your team members. Because in my experience, team members actually want to contribute, right? They want to make a difference. So we need to create that environment where that can happen. And any of you that have been following my work for a while will realize that Reward the Try is one of the accelerators of my unbridled teamship roadmap. This is a roadmap of how to create a high-performing team, a team that's fully aligned and where everyone's pulling together in the same direction. And Reward the Try is actually one of the accelerators related to the pillar in that roadmap called Healthy Curiosity, which is all about moving from compliance to candor. Because this is the truth. Execution doesn't collapse when teams don't care. It collapses when people don't feel safe. And they say things like, I don't know. And they don't want to admit mistakes in case something becomes expensive. So teamwork starts to look really careful. And it's not because people are lazy. It's because our culture is training our team members to do what is safe. And I share an experience of this that I had in the corporate world. Back in the late 1990s, when I was launching a website actually for the hospitality industry. And this was obviously very new, very pioneering. It was a time when the internet was just beginning to take off. And my boss had charged me with putting a lot of my data analytics and market research that I did on the web for my clients and creating a portal for them where they could access that data. And at the time, Arthur Anderson had a concept called knowledge space. And knowledge space was Arthur Anderson's solution to making information available on the net for our clients. And I remember there was a lot of pushback because everyone in the firm was saying that we were creating this community for the hospitality industry and we needed to give it this catchy name, knowledgespace.com/hospitality. And what I knew from all of my research was that people came to communities because they wanted to be part of it. So it needed to have a name that all of my users would resonate with. And I remember at the time pretty much flouting the company laws. And I said, we're not going to call it knowledgespace.com/hospitality. We're actually going to call it hotelbenchmark.com. We're going to say what it does on the tin. And I went ahead and I actually launched this website with that URL, hotelbenchmark.com. And I remember the day I pulled the trigger on it and launched it. And I was just waiting for the repercussions to come throughout the firm because I really was convinced we were going to get it shut down. And actually, we didn't because I had a very forward thinking boss who could see the rationale for my decisions, why I was doing that. But I had a good level of trust and respect with him. And also, I felt a pretty high level of psychological safety that I felt it was okay to try that and that I wouldn't lose my job over it. But I could imagine in another situation, if I hadn't felt like that, I wouldn't even tried. I would have just gone with the company line. So this is why this psychological safety is so important because it gets us to push the boundaries on what we're doing and gets to do things differently. But it's really important that when we are thinking about this and how we can do things differently, when we're creating this experimentation lab, we want to really start with things that are small. We really don't want to start with anything that's big because let's face it, a majority of these experiments aren't going to work. So we don't want to engage in anything that could potentially take the business down. And as leaders, we need to be really clear that as we encourage these experiments, we don't punish the failure of them when they don't work. Actually, what we encourage people to do is fail because we know that the only time that people learn is learning from their mistakes. So when we don't allow people to experiment, we create this risk avoidance culture going on within the organization. We also create politics, silence, and a dependency on the leader. And also a team that's that lacks initiative and waits to be told what to do, because that's the only way that they know they're going to keep them safe. And this becomes very dangerous. And it's very understandable, right? When we think about the neurology of human beings, we are wired to keep ourselves safe. That's embedded into our DNA, right? We are flight or fight beings. And so our main role, if we go back to caveman times, was to keep ourselves safe. If we're in an environment where we don't feel safe and we fear we are going to get reprimanded, we are never going to try anything, because that's going to be so much against our neurology of keeping safe. What I really want you to think about is how your team and how your teams operate is we want to reward intelligent risks that our team members take. And we want to celebrate the learning signals that people have experimented and they've learned from what they've done and they've moved on. So we want to make these attempts at trying really visible. And we also need to create really clear guardrails on what our team can and can't do, so that they've effectively got a safety net in which to fail. Because the more we try new things in our business, the more experiments we get to take, the more fun it is. And the more we can get to validate the learning that we have. So just want you to think about this. The more opportunities that we have to take experiments, the more we get to learn. The more we get to learn, the faster we can make decisions and the cheaper the wins become, because we can learn from our mistakes and what's going on. And as a result of that, we're able to increase trust within the organization, and this velocity returns, and we're able to get more momentum going on. And so there's a real paradox here, because actually the more we experiment, the more we learn from the experiments, the more we can move forward and the more we can accelerate business growth. So Amy Edmondson is the founder of the whole concept really of psychological safety in the workplace. And she defines this as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking, meaning that a person won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So it's really important that we realize when we're creating this psychological safety, it's not about being nice. It's all about creating a space where people can speak up and say things like, I think we're missing something. I think we've made a mistake. I don't understand. I disagree. Or maybe even, here's a really wild idea to think about, so that we get to open our understanding and think in different ways. And we really want our team members to be able to say all of these things without fear of humiliation, blame, social exile, or recrimination. I think it's important to address the fact that psychological safety isn't about lowering standards, and it's not about avoiding harsh feedback. And it's also not about getting endless consensus on what we need to do next. And it's definitely not about letting people off the hook with this kind of anything goes type of mentality. Actually, it's really the opposite. And when done well, this psychological safety creates high standards and a low level of fear within the organizations. And the team learn faster and effectively and consistency. So Amy Edmondson is really clear that psychological safety is a learning and performance concept and not some kind of cozy culture concept. So I just want to share with you some research from Google, and this is from Google's Project Aristotle. And it was some research that they did on team effectiveness. And what it highlighted is that at the bottom of a pyramid, there was a green bar that was called psychological safety. And they deemed that was the most important thing in team dynamics, because people will take interpersonal risks and speak up and learn faster when it's present. And I think this is so important in the environment we live in today, because our team members aren't going to be agile and adaptive, which is exactly what we need in our organizations right now. And they're not going to be able to navigate change without having psychological safety in place. So what the research showed in Project Aristotle was when we've got this level of psychological safety, then we've got this dependability within our team members. And then when everyone has clear goals and they understand their roles, then team members can start aligning with work that feels meaningful to them and where they can make a contribution. And then they can see how their work makes an impact. We know that when team members find their work making an impact, they're more highly engaged and motivated. And so psychological safety really underpins everything that we're doing in the workplace today. Because when people have this sense of belonging and they know they're part of an organization that cares for them, they can voice their concerns when they see things that are not working. And as I said, from a leader's perspective, it enables us to have this level of innovation and adaptability and flexibility to navigate the change that's going on. So how do we create psychological safety in the workplace? I think there's 4 ways I'd like to suggest that you could tackle this. And the first is that we want to frame the work as learning and not flawless execution. So when we're working with our teams, we want them to know it's okay to make mistakes. And I know that might sound a bit counterintuitive, a bit strange when I say it, but let's face it, the only way that people learn is when they try something and they make a mistake. So as a leader, we need to set things up so our team members get the opportunity to make these mistakes and that they can then learn quickly and be rewarded for having a go at making the try. The second way that we want to create psychological safety is about being fallible and vulnerable with our team. Because we're living in a time which none of us have lived through before. We are living in a world where change is volatile. It's happening all of the time. And so there is really no way that the leader can know everything. I go back to the industrial era where the shop floor manager might have known everything that was going on. A lot of what was happening is we were working in a very stable environment, and that isn't the case today. So we need our leaders to be vulnerable and admit that they might be missing something, and therefore get the input and share the leadership with their team, because actually this shows the leader is just human. And the team stops wasting time on self-protection when they know that the leader feels comfortable being vulnerable and admitting they don't know everything. And so what we're really seeing nowadays in business is the leader is often learning at the same speed that the team is learning. So the third way that we create psychological safety is that we want to replace some of the language we use with who messed up, for example, with what did we learn? Because, as we said, people are not going to take risks when they're going to be penalized for it. So as leaders, we need to make sure that we're not using blame language. We want to make sure that everyone learns collectively from everything that we do, and then we can make some clear decisions about what to do next. And so we need to reward people for trying something new. And then the fourth way we create psychological safety is responding well when somebody takes the risk. And for me, this is often the make or break moment. Because when somebody says something, often our response as a leader, particularly if it's something negative, can be to knock them down. But actually, what we need to do is embrace everyone's concepts and say, thanks for raising that. Say more. What are you seeing that we're not seeing? And we've got to do this even if we disagree with what the person's saying, because we need to make sure our team members feel heard, feel validated. Otherwise, they're not going to bring the next best idea to us. And this is so important if we want our team members to take ownership. And one of the biggest things that clients have been saying to me at the moment is team members aren't taking ownership and accountability. But people are never going to take accountability and ownership if they don't feel it's safe to do. I know I hear a lot, team members dodge the bullet. I wasn't responsible for that. I wasn't accountable for that. And those aren't the actions of a high performance team. We only get accountability in a high performance team when people feel supported and they're working in this environment of psychological safety. So How do we implement this? I want you to try something called the TRY loop. It's an acronym for try. So the first part of the loop is test. So we want to test the experiments, and we want to start with something small and then learn from it. So you might want to think about, what's the smallest version of this experiment that I can create, that I can test for 7 days? And then we want to put in guardrails in place so that we can keep the budget in place and we understand the customer impact and the reputation risk that this is going to look like. And it's really important that we give guardrails to this so that our team have effectively got a sandbox in which to work. Because if they don't, they are going to panic and they're not going to be sure what to do. And also, without the guardrails in place, what can happen is that a team member could go totally off-piste. And think about the Barings situation with Nick Leeson. The rogue trader had no guardrails in place, was pretty much able to do what he wanted. And as a result, he actually ended up taking down Barings Bank, a massive institution there that nobody ever believed that would happen. But it pretty much came from the actions of one person who had no guardrails in place and no checks and balances to make sure he was staying under control. And we are setting up an experiment to massively fail and call reputational risk if also senior leadership abdicate from what the person is doing. And that's exactly what happened in the Nick Leeson case. He was actually embezzling from the firm, and that's what took the whole company down. So the second part of the try loop is rewards. So the R of try is for reward. So when we're reviewing what goes on, we want to use 3 questions. What did we expect? What happened? And what did we learn that could change our next move? So we've got to say this with no judgment, because if we start shaming people, that's when people stop trying in business. And so here's an example of a great reward that I heard about at Virgin Airlines. Situation some of you might be familiar with. When you fly Virgin upper class, you get a limo that picks you up from your home and brings you to the airport. And so the story goes that was reported was, gentlemen, the limo forgot to pick him up. He got his own taxi to the airport. When he went up to the check-in clerk to complain, she took the initiative upon herself, refunded the gentleman's taxi fare because obviously Virgin had made an error and not picked him up. And so the customer was very happy and things moved on. The problem, however, happened when the check-in clerk went to claim back the fees for the gentleman's taxi fare because she didn't have a receipt. And her line manager actually refused to do it, and she got in trouble for it. And so the story goes that actually Richard Branson ended up hearing about this and was absolutely furious because he saw the initiative that check-in clerk had taken as exactly the type of behavior he wanted to reward in the company. So actually, her money was all refunded. She was rewarded for exactly what she did. And ironically, her boss actually got in trouble for this. So that's a great example of demonstrating how we're rewarding the try within the business. And then the why of try is yes. How do we apply the learning? And it's really important, once we've figured it out and we've done the test and we've rewarded the try, we really need to figure out what is going on next and how we're going to apply what we've done so that we can scale this, or how we're going to tweak it to do something differently. And there might be something that we learn from the experiment. What do we need to stop? But we also need to be really clear on how we're capturing the learning, right? Because if nothing changes, the people will stop trying. And I'd like you to think of this a little bit like a decision line that we have within a company and within a business. And at one end, team members are totally empowered to take decisions and full accountability. And at the other end, people are uncertain and unsure. And what we find is that what we really want is people to feel empowered at the front line to take these decisions because of this high level psychological safety. But if they don't, what we see are the decisions getting moved up and up the line, and to the point that the leadership team is overloaded with decisions. And actually, they become an execution bottleneck because everything is sitting on their desks and nothing can happen. So really important that within your organization, you're thinking about this decision line and where does your team sit on it? What are the trade-offs going on? Because as a leadership team, you cannot be making all of the decisions. That's just not a good use of your time and energy. And we need to empower our team members to make the decisions. But as I said, the decisions need to be made within some guidelines. For example, on that Virgin check-in cashier, maybe she should have had a guideline that said she could remunerate money up to, say, $1,000 or something. Then that person would have felt even more motivated and empowered to make these kind of decisions. The other thing I just want to draw our attention to as we're bringing this to a close is I really want you to think about body language. In the work with the horses, we talk a lot about body language because obviously the horses don't speak, but please do not underestimate how your body language can kill the psychological safety within your team. If your team member makes a decision and all of a sudden your body language tenses and you're looking a bit frustrated or confused, that immediately sends a message to your team member that they need to be really careful and maybe they shouldn't have said that. So make sure you don't unwittingly punish what somebody says by raising an eyebrow or making a sarcastic joke. Because that kind of behavior is exactly going to shut down wanting people to experiment. And if our team is waiting for clarity about what to do, they're really probably waiting for some permission from us to be imperfect. So I'd really like you to think about what is one thing your team is scared to try out, shrink it down to something that you can do for 7 days, guardrail it and review it without blame, and then actually change something afterwards. Because as Richard Branson says, we experiment endlessly with new products, new methods, new companies, new marketing, a successful business. The emphasis is on experiment and development. These ideas are the lifeblood of the business. So if we don't create this environment for the experimentation to happen, then nothing changes. So my question for you this week is, what experiments are you going to put in place in your business? As I said, you want to make them short, sharp experiments, maybe quick 7-day experiments. We need to be getting this continual feedback on what experiments are working and what aren't, so that we can continually reinvent and make new changes. So think about these experiments as being very short sprints. We can do them, we can get the feedback, we can move on. If you make the experiment 3 or 4 months, then you only get to do 3 or 4 experiments a year. You're not going to learn that much, and the world is moving way too fast for that. So think about what is the shortest minimal viable period you can create an experiment in, do it, then get the team together, learn from everything that's happened, and then create the next experiment and go again. So this is just a continual process of iteration so that we can continually adapt and be agile to all the changes going on around us in the workplace. So if you'd like to learn more about how Reward the Try can work within your business, then please do just reach out for me for a complimentary call. I love speaking to you. And I think this is just such an important thing that's going on right now in business, is if we want to be able to navigate uncertainty and lead with this adaptability and flexibility that we all need, then we really need to create this culture of psychological safety where our team members step up and try new things, because the way that we've run businesses is no longer fit for purpose for the 21st century, and we've got to find new ways of doing this. And for me, experimentation is one of them. So until next week, have an amazing time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?